There is something very different about these lenses. It is not about specs or branding. These stand out in a market that is massively oversaturated with cinema lenses. Today, I'm going to break down why these lenses are different and uncover the story behind them. So let's all get up to speed with how we got to these lenses we are looking at today, as I believe it's pretty important. And it all starts with the lens manufacturer DZO. So for anybody who has not heard of DZO, they are a cinema lens manufacturer who recently stormed the world of video production with their very good but very affordable cinema lenses. But today we are not here to talk about DZO lenses. Kinda not, it gets pretty complicated. What DZO have decided to do now is take their knowledge in the world of manufacturing cinema lenses and do collaborations with other manufacturers. So let me introduce to you a company called Typoc. Now I am probably butchering that pronunciation with my accent. These are definitely newer to the lens game, but they have been around for a little while, making tiny little lenses in the world of Leica cameras. Stay with me here, I promise in just 1 second this is all about to make sense. Leica was founded by a company called Litz many years ago. And since then, Leica has moved away from the branding of Litz and become its own company and entity. So Leica are now infamous for their photography cameras, and for anyone who's in the world of high-end cinema production, they will know that Litz are infamous for their very expensive but very good cinema lenses. So how does all this tie back to DZO and Typoc? Well, Typoc, being in the world of Leica cameras, wanted to create a lens that holds the same characteristics and some similarities to the higher end Litz lenses, but bring those down to be much more affordable lenses for indie filmmakers. But one thing Typoc did know, that they was not going to do this alone. So that is where Typoc went and teamed up with DZO to help with the manufacturing on the lens that we are looking at today, which is called the Samira C. Now this thing has massive ambitions on a really small budget. So I guess there is only one thing that we need to find out now, and that is, did they actually pull it off? The first thing you are going to notice when you get your hands on these lenses is they are tiny. And this fits right in what Typoc are known for in the world of lenses. The weight follows right along here as well. They weigh 390 to 470 grams, depending on which focal length in the kit you choose. So basically, if you are someone who loves keeping things small and lightweight, then you are going to love these lenses. They are full aircraft grade aluminium or aluminum for my American people. And I would say my own first impressions of picking them up was very good. Something you do need for something to feel quite expensive is a little bit of weight. So putting aside that these lenses are really light, I would say that they are super well made and durable. We have full matching aperture and focus, as you'd expect on a set of cinema lenses. And we also have metric and imperial focus markings with a 210 degrees throw, which is just chef kisses and feels really great when it comes to manual focusing. A full kit comes with a 28, 35, 50 and 75, all with the aperture of t1.5. These are full frame coverage, so that is super impressive taking into consideration the size and weight of these things. Typoc did also let me know that there is a 21mm coming that should be out just about when this video drops. There is only really one negative when it comes to the build quality and design of these lenses that I can personally find, and that is they only come in E mount. It would be amazing to see these in a PL or an L mount or any other mount for that matter, as you'll see in a sec. These are very interesting lenses. So I have the timeline here in Resolve full of some test shots I've taken, but let's just keep in mind here, when you are dealing with lenses that are after a certain personality, feel, character, they aren't going to be perfect, and that is done by design. First up here we have the 28mm. I like to film something with kind of a pattern or kind of like a repeatable structure, as I find that is where you can see stuff like distortion. But the first thing I will point out here is the sharpness of these lenses, punching in 500%. It's hard to gauge without seeing them side by side, but I can tell you from my experience, these are not too sharp in terms of where modern day lenses have gotten to. I would say these are like a B+. I kind of love the detail here, but without that kind of harsh sharpness. It's kind of what we want for cinematic video. So for me, this kind of B+ sharpness zone is kind of perfect and ideal. Coming back to the 28mm wide open shot of the wall again, I was a little bit off skew, but we can still see that there is very little distortion here. Using this 28mm out in the real world on projects and stuff like that, I would have guessed it had way more distortion than this. I don't know if it's to do with like the swirly background kind of vintage feel it has. I don't know, it just feels like it's got more distortion. If I come down to the lens correction in Resolve and analyze, it reckons it's a 0.044, which for a full frame 28mm is really, really good. See, they're just slightly changed. And the same feeling continues here when looking at vignetting. I would have expected so much more. There is some. So going from T1.5 wide open, stepping down to T2, you can see as I punch back and forward here, it just takes that kind of middle brightness and creates a much more even frame. It's kind of one of the main benefits of having such a wide aperture. Most like high-level cinematographers won't shoot wide open, but what it does mean, if your lens goes all the way to T1.5, like these lenses, then when you are stepping down on the aperture to T2 or T2.8, you're just going to get an even better, sharper, kind of more perfected image when you need it. So let's take a look at chromatic aberration. For those who don't know, this happens in really high contrast scenarios. So a really common place for that would be around tree branches, as they are lit by the sky behind them and they tend to push shadow towards camera, creating that kind of high contrast. All lenses have some kind of chromatic aberration. It's just how well it's managed and what type of colours you are dealing with. Some tend to go cyan, where some go purple. If we punch in here to 500%, I'm not sure how well this is coming across on YouTube, but there is quite a lot of chromatic aberration. Again, I think this is done on purpose. I think that most high-end cinema lenses tend to have a lot of chromatic aberration, which sounds quite strange, I know. But just scrubbing the timeline right here, you can see hopefully on YouTube that there's some purple here. It's almost like a luminous purple. Keeping in mind we're 500% cropped in, this is nowhere near as visible as we're seeing. You can see we're right in this center section. So you can't really see it from here. It's more of a feel to the lenses. This is just another scenario to show chromatic aberration. I want to show where the darker bush comes across and meets the bright sky. And again, we have it. More of the same, purple fringing when leading away from the camera into the bokeh areas. So yeah, it's definitely there. And it's all personal preference. So here I wanted to demonstrate the out of focus areas, as I believe it is one of the really, really strong points of these lenses. When I pull focus here onto this railing, you can see the background swirls. Is that the right way to describe it? It'll become much more clearer in a sec when we go onto the bokeh test, but the background just has texture to it. It's quite like lifted, creamy. I don't know how I would describe it, but I'm really a fan of it. It kind of draws to a center point, feels like it's vortexing in a really subtle way. Another example here of just the lens out of focus filming these fairground lights, and this thing is beautiful. The perfect orbs, this is wide open on the 50mm. The color rendition, it just is really pleasant in its out of focus areas. It's something that these lenses absolutely nail. So here is the magnification ratio, or the minimum focus distance, and how it performs there. It's really good. Again, better than I would have expected for a lens that has so much character. This is no macro lens, don't get me wrong. You need some sort of diopter to achieve them sort of shots. But in a pinch, if you wanted to get a real close-up, then these lenses perform excellent. Here I've gone side by side with a Niset Athena 50mm and the Typox Mira C 50mm. As I believe the Nisi lenses are a really close comparison. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're in the same range and they're probably aimed at the same person. These look very similar. I think there's a little bit more contrast just being punched into this wall here. That could be a mistake on the amount of ND I'm trying to dial in. I tried matching them up the best I could, but I think the sky's a bit brighter, so I might have exposed a little bit brighter on this. Very similar images from this point of view. I'm seeing slight more contrast in the Nisis, and then just kind of that lifted vintage look in the Typox. Punching into 500%, we can see that a little bit of extra contrast and sharpness in the Nisi Athena lens. But this got me thinking. The Athenas are T1.9 wide open, and the Samira Cs are T1.5. Unfortunately, I only realised this after I was editing the test together, but stepping down to T1.9 on the Samira C lens, you may actually get sharper footage, or at least equal. As we just mentioned earlier, that advantage of having the wider aperture means that you can bring those aperture blades in what equals sharper, more detailed footage. So let's take a look at some orbs, and first up we've got the wide open 50mm T1.5, so we've got loads to look at here. And the thing I'm trying to show is how much it cat's eyes or like ovals the bokeh to the edges of the frame. And that's kind of how you get that kind of swirly vortex feel to your out of focus areas. It's really clear here if I pause the frame. Down in this bottom corner, it's almost arcing, creating like this kind of shape of the lens. So focus breathing here, as I rack focus, you will see the box, the square grid on the wall get bigger and smaller. And we do have focus breathing here. It's not overly distracting, but there is some. So we're looking at flares here, 28mm wide open at T1.5. And there is not that many elements to the flares. They're actually quite controlled. I expected way more with just the nature and the design of these lenses. This is on low power mode. You'll see in a sec when we get to high power mode that they do lose contrast just here. But again, it's quite pleasant. You got to keep in mind this is really unrealistic. You are not going to get a torch on high power mode and just blast it down the barrel in the real world. It's going to be more off of the frame or off the edges. This was at that fairground again, and I think it's a great example of a real world test where these lights on the front of the carriage was beaming directly at the camera, and you can see it handles them really well. I was not expecting it to keep this much contrast. This, again, is almost like a halfway house between like a photography modern lens and a vintage lens. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. And I guess that is the aim of where we are going with these lenses. So what are they like to use in the real world? Well, in terms of usability, simply put, they are a pleasure. If I had to be super nitpicky, I would say that for my personal taste, they're a little bit too small. But I'm someone who does not like to keep things small. I'm using big, stupid cinema cameras like the Brano. And if you look here on the FX3, they do balance awfully well. As I mentioned before, I'm a real big fan of manual focusing on these lenses. They are well dampened, and that 210-degree throw is exactly where I personally like it. You don't have to spend very long on either the T-stop or the focus before you've got the hang of it and you can do repeatable motions. And that takes me on to what is the character like in the real world with these lenses. As we know by now, these lenses are not trying to be perfect, but what they are trying to be is cinematic. And honestly, the more I use these lenses, the more they actually won me over. I'm not sure if it's because they're so tiny and light, but you just don't expect images with this kind of feel and organicness to come out of these lenses. In a world of G-Master lenses, these feel so natural and refreshing. They have a bit of a vintage feel to them. They're very smooth. Nothing is harsh about them. They do have like imperfections. They focus breathe here. They don't control the flare here, and all that is amazing. It's personality. I love the swirly backgrounds and soft contrast, and with that T1.5 aperture, it's really easy to separate your subject from the background, and you mix that in with how nice it looks on people's skin, and you really do start to get some amazing kind of portrait or subject shots with character with these lenses. If I had to say there was a downside, I would say these are not the most versatile lenses in this price point. Say if you wanted to one day shoot a fashion commercial and the next go and do something super corporate and clean, they would definitely lean more into that fashion commercial than the corporate one. But you can just tell when using these lenses that they are made for storytelling, they are made for creating beautiful frames and images. It's more art than perfection. There's only two drawbacks I would say in picking these lenses, and one is they are E-mount only, so there's no PL mount, and PL mount is always going to be the safest option for future-proofing your lenses. And two, if you're after the sharp, perfect image, then these lenses may not be right for you. The last question to answer would be, Did Typoc successfully go up there and steal personality and character from those Lix lenses, bringing it all the way down to a super affordable price point? Well, I will leave that one open and let everyone else have their thoughts down below in the comments. But one question that I can answer is, did Typoc create the best value lens on sale today for creating cinematic images? And I believe the answer is yes. If you want to see me creating images with these lenses, watch this video here.